On the show tonight, a schoolyard fist fight, a Florida forensic, and Hillary Clinton's message finale. But first, with less than 2 weeks before the election, Donald Trump did what every underdog presidential candidate would do in his position: attend a hotel ribbon cutting with his family here in Washington, D.C. There has been some head scratching in the media over this move, with critics accusing Trump of foolishly taking time away from his campaign to promote his business interests. His team says it's a perfect example of his management and his leadership ability. For his part, Trump gave what some are calling one of the best and most focused speeches of his entire campaign, in which he touted his hotel and, in his signature line of the speech, said the project was finished under budget and ahead of schedule, and promised to bring that kind of ethic to Washington. After the event, in an interview for The Circus, our Showtime documentary series produced in conjunction with Bloomberg Politics, I asked Trump about what was for him a very personal speech today.
I was just trying to say that we built a great building. We took it out of the doldrums, one of the great structures in the country, and we built it under budget and ahead of schedule. And to me, that was very important, Mark, because our country is so, we can't build a highway, we can't build a bridge, we can't fix a tunnel. You know, we're in such trouble. So, you know, I'm very happy with the way it's all worked out. But this building has turned out to be so amazing.
But how does the building connect to your presidential aspirations and your qualifications?
Under budget, ahead of schedule. It's very simple. You know, you look at what's going on. We owe $20 trillion. And that was really... Now, also I wanted to come and stop, and it takes an hour and a half, and we do it. But what it really says is you can do things under budget and great work. This will be one of the great hotels of the world. Under budget, ahead of schedule. Our country has to do things under budget and ahead of schedule.
We'll have more of that interview from Showtime's The Circus later in the program. After our talk, Trump went back out on the campaign trail to the battleground state of North Carolina this afternoon. John, was going to this hotel opening a distraction, or was it a smart political move?
Well, I would say, Mark, that if Donald Trump had spent this entire campaign talking about his prowess as a builder and creating a message architecture around that, this event today would have been on message and potentially effective in making the argument that he was making today. As it happens, it seems random and was kind of tailor-made to generate the kind of news coverage that it's generated, where people look at it and say, this is Donald Trump looking past Election Day and focused on his business interests and not on spending his valuable time in the battleground states he needs to win the presidency.
As is often the case, the campaign didn't lay enough groundwork. They think the press is hostile to them, but they didn't do a good job in advance explaining it. I thought it really was one of the best speeches he's given. It was thematic. He was calm and optimistic about the future of America, was not particularly negative about Hillary Clinton. I don't know if he'll give the speech ever again, but if he'd given a version of this at the convention, and had driven that message into the fall, I think he'd be doing better, at least in terms of message and in terms of style. It was one of the most natural and kind of heartfelt seeming speeches I've heard him give. But getting off the campaign trail, I think people are making way too much of it. People go all the time, candidates do, including in the last week, to give big focused speeches in places like New York and Chicago. Washington, with this hotel that he's very proud of, that does represent an accomplishment for him. Makes sense to me.
Well, again, I would say maybe candidates do get off the campaign trail and go give big focus speeches. They usually do it in May or June or July. They don't usually do it in the last 2 weeks, especially when they're behind in virtually every battleground state across the country where he needs to move votes. I just think, look, like so many Trump speeches, I think we're saying essentially the same thing here. Like, he gave the speech the other day on ethics reform before the third debate. If he'd started giving that speech in May and given it in a consistent, disciplined way for 6 months, he'd be in a better position than he is now. But he didn't, and so he's not. Same with this speech.
Yeah, definitely too little and too late to be a game-changing speech, but a very well-written speech and well-delivered, which isn't often the case for Donald Trump.
You can say that again. All right, Joe Biden and Donald Trump have been engaged in some spirited mano-a-mano, towel-snapping trash talk. It started on Friday while the vice president was campaigning in Pennsylvania, and over the past few days, well, see for yourself.
The press always asks me, don't I wish I were debating him? No, I wish we were in high school. I could take him behind the gym. That's what I wish.
I'll get myself in trouble and say something like I'd like to take him behind the gym if I were in high school.
I want to make it clear. I understand what assault is. I'm not in high school. If I were in high school, I used to have a temper in high school. I don't have a temper anymore. Nothing ever bothers me. Look, folks, no.
Did you see where Biden wants to take me to the back of the barn? Me. He wants it. I'd love that. I'd love that. Mr. Tough Guy.
The point I was making is he is trying to dumb down. He's insulting everybody in the neighborhoods I come from and the people who played ball. And that was the point I was trying to make. This is just absolutely unacceptable behavior, period.
So, Mark, Joe Biden started this fight, and he keeps stoking it. Finally got Trump to respond yesterday, so he's still on it. So what's Joe Biden's game here?
I think it's 50% like Elizabeth Warren, like Hillary Clinton to some extent. He likes getting under Trump's skin and provoking Trump and trying to put the focus on Trump. But I think it's 50% Joe Biden doesn't back down. And having made the first remark probably off the top of his head, he's just not inclined to back down, particularly that after Trump basically came back at him.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no doubt that for a Democratic side that has wanted to paint Trump with the brush of not temperamentally fit to be president, they're always trying to provoke him and push him and get him to lash out in some way to keep making their point that he shouldn't be in the Oval Office. But I agree with you. You know, we talked to Biden about this a little bit when we were with him after he brought it up the second time in Toledo on Monday. And I got some sense that, the truth is that really the part of the reason Joe Biden keeps saying this is because he'd really like to kick Donald Trump's butt.
Yeah. And also, look, this is the most direct engagement. He's been a critic of Trump, but is one of the few times, maybe the only time, Trump's responded to him directly. And I think we all know that Joe Biden would like to go out here and end this cycle as a big player, and this gets him in colloquy with the Republican nominee.
Right. That's a huge thing, right? I mean, Biden, the reality is that he's out there doing yeoman's work on the campaign trail, arguing the case for Hillary Clinton, arguing the case for down-ballot Democrats, but often in front of relatively small crowds, lusty crowds, but small crowds. This put him squarely in the national news narrative this week, and that is where Joe Biden loves to be, especially in the closing 2 weeks of a campaign.
And it does, for Biden watchers, whet the appetite for what might have been, had Biden been the Democratic nominee. The back and forth between Donald Trump and Joe Biden would have been quite something. Donnybrook. Yeah. All right. There's some new polls out today, like every day. A Suffolk University national survey shows Hillary Clinton leading Donald Trump by 9 points amongst likely voters. That's the exact same margin that another poll from NBC News, The Wall Street Journal, and Marist has Clinton up by in New Hampshire, while they have the two candidates tied in Nevada. But the most important poll of the day, if we do say so ourselves, is a brand new Bloomberg Politics poll of likely voters in Florida. Despite Trump's national dip, the race has been tightening in the Sunshine State. Our survey shows it is razor thin, with Trump leading Clinton by 2 points amongst likely voters, 45 to 43%, with the other when other candidates are factored in the race. In the two-person race, Trump's margin is just 1%, of course, both within the margin of error. The two candidates are deadlocked in our survey with independents. That's a group that Barack Obama won in Florida in 2012. Clinton leads amongst early voters. She's also ahead amongst Hispanic voters, 51 to 36%. That is, though, a smaller margin amongst Hispanics than some other polls have elsewhere in the country, in part, of course, because Hispanics in Florida include Cuban Americans, who are a long-time Republican-leading bloc. Clinton is campaigning today in the Sunshine State, where there's evidence that her team has the edge in the ground game. John, at the moment, given our poll and other factors, who would you give the upper hand to in Florida?
Let me just say, Mark, that we have a little bit of breaking news right now on the polling front, which is that there's a new AP poll that in a four-way race has Hillary Clinton up by 14 points nationally, 51 to 37. So let's throw that onto the polling bonfire here and take that into account. But focusing just on Florida, I think the race is going to be very close in Florida. I think that the Democrats Hillary Clinton continues to have a small advantage there because of the nature of demographic change in Florida, because of the superior ground game that the Democrats have there, because of the early vote. I think that that they have a small advantage still. But the trend line there would be worrying for me if I was Hillary Clinton. The race just keeps getting tighter and tighter in Florida. And if she doesn't turn that around, she might just lose that state.
Yeah, you'd have to say, again, given all this national data, that Hillary Clinton would still be the mild favorite there. Yep. But there are two things that cause me to think Trump could well win Florida. One is Rick Scott is the governor. And Rick Scott getting elected governor there shows you a conservative business person, outsider, is somebody who appeals to Florida voters. The other is, every time I've gone to the state, in all parts of the state outside of South Florida, I sense intense enthusiasm for Trump and less for Hillary Clinton. And it's such a mega state. As strong as the Clinton ground game is, as well organized it is, it's just simply hard to organize a state that big.
Yeah, there's no question about that, except for, you know, I think we're going to see in the early votes she's going to do well there. Look, I think it's really, this is one of the states that I think is kind of pretty close to a pure toss-up state. I still, for the reasons we just said, that 14-point lead in that AP poll, man, another big national polling lead for Hillary Clinton. Yeah. Incredible. All right, now for a message from Hillary Clinton.
Far too many families today don't earn what they need and don't have the opportunities they deserve. I believe families deserve quality education for their kids, childcare they can trust and afford, equal pay for women, and jobs they can really live on. People ask me, what'll be different if I'm president? Well, kids and families have been the passion of my life, and they will be the heart of my presidency.
That was one of two new ads that the Clinton campaign put out today, outlining her closing arguments at the end of this long and arduous presidential race. Here is the other ad.
Our children, they look up to us, what we value, how we treat others. And now they're looking to see what kind of leaders we choose, who will entrust our country and their future to. Will it be the one respected around the world, or the one who frightens our allies and emboldens our enemies? The one with a deep understanding of the challenges we face, or the one who is unprepared for them? A steady hand or a loose cannon?
All right, Mark, we heard Donald Trump's closing argument in Gettysburg last weekend, which, of course, was overshadowed by Trump's threat to sue all the women who have accused him of sexual assault. But my question for you is, how well do you think these Clinton ads will translate into her closing argument message in these final 2 weeks of the campaign?
You know, a lot of Hillary Clinton's ads during the nomination fight against Bernie Sanders were not given high marks, but I think the general election ads have been relatively good. I think these are two pretty strong ads, and as a lot of campaigns do, that she's trying to close on a more positive message, a more unifying message, a softer message. And I think these are pretty solid to turn out the kind of voters she'll need to keep the lead that she's got right now.
I agree with that 100%, and they are closing on they're closing on two tracks, basically. Two ads, two tracks. One ad that's about the real lives of real people, and one ad that's basically a negative ad against Donald Trump. The scary faces that Trump's making, it looked almost like he was doing, making kind of an unpleasant salute there with his hand in one that kind of will conjure some negative images for people. I think that those ads together make effective 1-2 punch, and they have a lot of money behind them. We know that ads don't matter that much in general election, but they have a lot of money behind them. Donald Trump has shut down his fundraising operations. I think that if she takes the arguments from those ads and makes them effectively on the stump, that's a good way to end the campaign for her.
Yeah, we still don't know exactly how much Trump's going to put in and what the spending mix will be. And we also don't know with these ads just how much they'll run both of them. The campaigns can claim they're going to run them equally, whatever. They can change it up. So we just don't know. But in terms of content, those are two very strong spots.
Yep.
All right, up next, we'll go back and show you more of my interview from here in Washington, D.C. today with Donald J. Trump right after this. Back here in our nation's capital, where earlier today I covered Donald Trump's hotel ribbon cutting in the old post office building on Pennsylvania Avenue, the brand new Trump International Hotel. In an interview for The Circus, our Showtime documentary series, produced in conjunction with Bloomberg Politics, I spoke to Trump after the event, and I asked him about what his opponents have been saying about his new building.
You'd be surprised to hear that Hillary Clinton's already criticized the hotel.
I wouldn't be surprised.
She said it's a new luxury hotel, but it's the same old story. Relied on undocumented workers to make his project cheaper, products from other countries. He even sued to make his taxes lower.
So just let me say, we had no undocumented workers. A false report was written that they found a couple out of the thousands of people that built it. We had no undocumented workers building this hotel. And in fact, we used E-Verify. For every single worker was E-Verify. And a newspaper came over and looked and said, oh, I think that person's undocumented. This was an E-Verify building. Every single worker was documented and perfected.
Are there foreign products in the building?
That I don't know. I mean, I would like to make it so there weren't, but unfortunately this country doesn't make things anymore. You know, if you look, our country doesn't make things anymore. Things you buy, whether it's look at a Carrier air conditioner, just moved to Mexico. China, Mexico, Germany, they're making all of our product. This is one of the reasons I'm running, because I know how to turn it around. I mean, the problem we have when you build something like this, so much of the bidding has to go to other countries because we don't make product anymore. Television sets. I would love to buy television sets made in the United States, but they're all made in South Korea and in Japan.
I want to ask you about the polls, but first, one more about the speech. Did it feel differently to you? People are reacting like this is a different tone, a different way of talking about your candidacy. Did it feel different?
Well, it didn't really. I mean, it's different. When I'm speaking in front of 25,000 people, like last night, we had an amazing crowd. We have amazing crowds all over. I mean, you know that. Yeah. We have maximum crowds, but last night we had 25,000, and we had 15,000 that couldn't get in. And you know the reason they told me why they couldn't let them in? Stampede.
But people who say this was a great Trump speech, as far as you're concerned, they're all great.
They say that. No, I think they're different. But that speech wouldn't be well received if I'm in front of 25,000 people with the spirit to make America great again. But that speech for the opening of a great hotel that employs a lot of people, et cetera, I think that speech was appropriate.
You've redefined how candidates talk about polls. Some polls now you're winning, some you're behind. We've got a new poll where you're up in Florida.
Yeah.
What's your general sense of where you are in the battleground states? Florida, Iowa, Ohio?
I think we're winning Iowa. I think we're winning Ohio. So do you. I think we're winning Florida. I think we're winning Florida actually by much more than your poll says. You have us 2 points up. I think we're going to do fantastically in Pennsylvania. I think we're winning North Carolina. I think we will soon be winning New Hampshire. We're going up there.
New poll today shows you closer.
Very close. I think as soon, when I go there, people see, look, it's jobs. It's fix our military. It's take care of our vets. It's don't let the world take advantage of us. I mean, I don't know if I'm a great messenger, but the message is absolutely the right message.
You're going to get 270-something electoral votes?
I think we're going to win. Yeah, I think we're going to win.
WikiLeaks, I know you and your campaign have said the press isn't covering enough. What do you want the American people to know about the message out of those? They're not Hillary Clinton's emails, but what does it say about her?
Well, WikiLeaks shows how crooked the whole thing is. I mean, it shows how unbelievably dishonest the whole thing is. And you know what else it shows? I don't know John Podesta, but he says terrible things about Hillary Clinton when he says she has bad instincts. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't want anybody talking about me the way he talks about her. He comes out strongly that she has bad instincts and she doesn't know what she's doing.
You think your team's ever written emails to each other about
you? I hope not. But, between Bernie Sanders with bad judgment, he says she has bad judgment. But when I look at an email sent by John Podesta that Hillary Clinton, who he works for, has bad instincts, that's a terrible thing to say. By the way, I don't want my president to have bad instincts, that I can tell you.
All right, dial up some room service or something, because we're going to have more of my conversation with Donald Trump right after this. Welcome back. I'm in Washington, D.C., where earlier today I interviewed Donald Trump. Here is part 2 of that discussion at his new hotel here in the nation's capital.
Are you a little under the weather? No, you're feeling good.
I feel great.
You're closing strong, you think?
Hey, look, I made 8 stops yesterday. I'm doing 5 or 6
I've never met a presidential candidate who didn't get sick.
Well, so far I haven't. Don't talk about it, okay? Don't put it in my head.
Your top communications aide
So far I have not. Well, that's not me. We're going to win. I really believe. And by the way, I wouldn't say it. I really believe it.
If you thought you were going to lose, you'd tell us you thought you were going to lose.
I would say that we will try to win.
Try to win.
There's a big difference. We will try. But we are going to win. And if you look at state by state, hey, look, you're the first one that came out today. Florida, we're up. And believe me, that number is a low number. I really believe it.
And you're not worried about Arizona, Utah, Georgia?
I think Arizona is going to be great. Look, Obamacare is going up over 100% in Arizona. Who in Arizona, and I want strong borders, which they want, because they're having tremendous crime problems and tremendous...
But the polls have gotten closer there.
Sure, it's closer, and I have a third-party person running, too, which doesn't exactly help me. I mean, without that, would win in a walk. But Arizona, I've done great in Arizona. I think we're going to have a very big victory in Arizona. We're going to have strong borders, and we are going to terminate Obamacare. You have to terminate. It's a disaster. Arizona, just about higher than anybody else. They're going to be over 100% increase. Hillary Clinton wants to keep it. She wants to make it even more expensive. We're going to win Arizona. And don't forget, we're also going to be doing a massive tax cut. She's going to raise taxes. I'm going to lower taxes.
You were criticized yesterday for not necessarily explaining how health care works well enough. Do you want to revise and extend?
No, I don't want to revise because they asked me about Obamacare, and I said Obamacare is a disaster. I wasn't referring to Doral.
Right, where you have private coverage.
No, I have so many people. I have so many different. I have companies with Obamacare. I have contractors with Obamacare. Right. Those people are suffering. But I wasn't referring to the people at Doral. And in fact, I didn't bring them out to talk about Obamacare or health care. I just brought them out to show what a great place that is. But Obamacare, people are suffering with Obamacare. Number one, it doesn't work. Number two, it's so expensive that they can't afford it. And number three, it's closing up businesses.
You're going back to a battleground state right now?
Yeah, I'm going back to North Carolina right now.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So, Mark, I have a question for you. You know, I watched both segments of the interview. Well done. What's Trump's body language like right now? I mean, a lot of people looked at what he's doing and have seen him in the last few days and think that he must kind of understand that he's losing, kind of slipping into defeatism, lashing out. He seemed pretty calm in that interview to me.
He did. He was, and in the event itself, as I said, he seemed to have almost a confidence, not a bragging confidence, but a quiet confidence. There's no doubt that his team knows he's behind, and behind nationally by more than they acknowledge. But as we discussed yesterday, you know, hope springs eternal with every behind candidate we've ever covered if you can see your way to 270 electoral votes. And right now, he's got a poll today from New Hampshire showing it closer. They've always been a little bullish on that one district in Maine. So I think obviously the data wouldn't give him as much confidence as he claims to have. But he did not seem to be anything today but comfortable with where he was and eager to get back out. But as I said, we've seen that with plenty of candidates we've covered when the data was like this.
Yeah, I mean, I would be a little bit, if I were him, I would be taking a deep breath looking at the fact that I have to have my running mate in Utah this close to Election Day if I were a Republican. But nonetheless, I'm struck by his calm today. I've not seen him that calm, it feels like, in months.
Yeah, he was both calm and kind of fired up. It was interesting, and like I said, every behind candidate does that. All right, so more of our interview with Donald Trump is going to air this Sunday night on The Circus on Showtime. You won't want to miss that, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. When we come back, we're going to talk some strategy and some campaign closing arguments with some smart people right after this.
It is time now for a meeting of and with the minds. With us now from Houston is the big brain, Jeff Rowe, Republican strategist and former campaign manager to Ted Cruz's presidential bid. And with us from Chicago, also a genius. We found him weeping over his Cubs loss last night in that horrible Game 1 of the World Series. Hari Savugan, who's a former senior spokesman for President Obama's 2008 campaign and a former national press secretary for the Democratic National Committee. Gentlemen, welcome. I'm going to ask you both the same question, something Mark and I have been discussing and puzzling over for the past 2 days. Jeff, I'll start with you. This new AP poll, not inconsistent with a lot of other national polls, has Hillary Clinton up by 14 points nationally. And yet on the same day, Bloomberg Politics, as one example of many battleground polls, shows the Florida race tightening and Trump only back by 2. So how do we reconcile the wide lead that Hillary Clinton has in the national polls with the much tighter state of affairs in the battleground states?
Well, it's political malpractice to have a national poll 2 weeks out from an election. But if you want to talk about the disparity is actually that they just get the natural coverage that goes with the presidential campaign nationally. They don't get the state by state. They don't get the advertising. They don't get the visits. They don't also get to really have the vibe of the campaign going on in their communities. They don't have activities. They don't have volunteerism. They don't have signs. They don't have any sort of aspect of a real campaign. So disparity runs at what the national performance of the national election looks like, and that typically is astray, much more so this year than normal because there's been so much negative information from a national perspective against Trump. But these state-by-state polls are all close, all margin of error, in every state that Donald would need to win.
Hari, same question to you, my friend.
Yeah, look, I think the polling is it's always going to be a greater disparity on the national level than in some of the swing states. That's why they're swing states to begin with. What I'm really looking at now, though, is more hard data that isn't as volatile, and that's the early vote numbers. So you look at a state like Florida, where Bloomberg had a poll out today, but the early vote numbers there are very encouraging for Hillary Clinton. You know, essentially they're tied in ballots that have come in between Republicans and Democrats in terms of that partisan split, whereas at this point in 2012, the Republican number was +5. So that, you know, the support score that you're going to see in polling is going to be a little bit more volatile. The hard data is what campaigns should be focusing on right now, and that's very encouraging for the Clinton campaign.
Jeff, we've heard talk of some Senate candidates, some House candidates concerned. I know you're in touch with a lot of folks who are running down ballot. Where does the level of concern or panic sit currently with Senate and House candidates on the Republican side, given Trump's circumstances?
Well, I think what everybody is bracing for is the national polls ever going to translate to these Senate races? So far, it's actually had a bit of an inverse relationship. As Trump has fallen, some of these Senate candidates have increased. I mean, in frankly, in most of the really targeted seats in the last 2 weeks, maybe with the exception of Florida and New Hampshire. But outside of those, they've all almost inversely been a beneficiary of the Trump fall. And so that's been encouraging. But I think what everybody's doing is, you know, the fraternity party and you're down in the basement and it's starting to sway a little bit and the floorboards are starting to have a little dust come out from under them. I mean, everybody's worried about a collapse. And when you see the Democrat money come into play and the super PAC money really pile in, everybody's worried about that. There are no signs yet of softening. In fact, it's gotten stronger. But that's what everyone's concerned about. But we haven't seen that expose itself yet.
Hari, as Republicans, who some have already begun to do, start to say, Hillary Clinton, we need to check on Hillary Clinton, basically telling voters, vote for Republicans for Congress to stop Hillary Clinton from having a majority. What's the right Democratic counter message for that if that begins in earnest?
Well, yeah, I actually don't even think you need one. I mean, it puts Republicans in a very difficult spot. So you look at like Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, who can't answer whether he's going to vote for Donald Trump or not. I mean, we saw what happened to Allison Lundgren Grimes in the last cycle when she couldn't answer who she voted for president. That's going to put them in a very difficult spot. We're seeing that same dynamic play out with Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire, to a great degree with Joe Heck in Nevada. That question, or that position where they have to essentially throw their presidential candidate under the bus, is going to anger the Republican base. They're sort of in a position where they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. And I would say that to the point raised earlier about the floor falling out, it has. The Cook Political Report today switched their rating to say that Democrats are going to pick up 5 to 7 seats, and for the first time they are saying that the Democrats are going to take the Senate back. So there's definitely signs of a shift, and it's because these Republicans are in a very difficult position.
Hari, I want to stick with you for a second and go back to your earlier answer, which pointed to early vote in Florida, something that I cited when we talked about this earlier in the show and you just cited. Is there any reason, obviously every campaign would like to bank votes. That's always, you'd rather bank the votes than be able to work on getting more new votes. But my question for you is, at this moment, is there any concern on Democrats' part that there's a lot of Democratic early vote right now because of a kind of sense of catharsis? The notion that, Democrats have been itching to vote against Donald Trump for so long that they're rushing into the early vote, but that may not end up being any different in terms of the raw totals when we get to Election Day.
Yeah, I don't think we're cannibalizing our Election Day vote at all. And what I think this is really a result of, I do think that there is this enthusiasm, certainly, and you were seeing it in states where we hadn't necessarily expected it. So, we're looking at early vote numbers in Harris County, Texas, and Dallas County, Texas, that are through the roof. In Travis County, where Austin is, it's up 100% compared to 2012. That's enthusiasm. That's just raw enthusiasm. But what I do think it is a result of is a really sophisticated data program where we've targeted voters and been engaging with them for a very long time. And getting them out through sophisticated plans for early vote. And we'll have that same kind of targeting for Election Day GOTV as well. But that's an investment in data and targeting and field that the Republican campaign hasn't had.
Great. Jeff, let me ask you the last question here. There are 4 states, traditionally red states, where Hillary Clinton is now, looks like she's inside the margin of error. Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Utah. Which of those 4 states should Donald Trump be most worried about?
Arizona would be the one. I mean, Arizona has been soft for quite some time, all the way through the general election. And that is a place where the early vote can manifest itself in a real way. And so I think another stop there, maybe sending Pence there. Utah's going to come around. They're going to be fine. Texas is a pipe dream. They're just cannibalizing the Election Day vote. And Democrats are just voting earlier. Yeah. It doesn't mean there's energy. Republicans, nationally, there's been 8 million people vote as of today, and more Republicans have voted than Democrats. So I don't think that's the case. But Arizona is a place I would watch, particularly with the Hispanic population growth there since 2012. I would keep an eye on that state. Okay.
Jeff Rowe, Hari Savugan, thank you both. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. You're both really smart. We'll have next a campaign surrogate showdown here and everywhere else in just a moment. If you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can listen to us as well on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We will be right back.
Today I want to talk about how to grow the African American middle class and to provide a new deal for Black America. That deal is grounded in 3 promises: safe communities, great education, and high-paying jobs.
That was Donald Trump this afternoon at a campaign event in Charlotte, North Carolina. We've switched out the strategist now for some surrogates, joined now by a surrogate from the Trump campaign, Dr. Gina Loudon, who comes to us from Imperial Beach, California. And in a studio in Gotham City is Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York. Thank you both for joining us. Congressman, start with you. I'm wondering what you think of that message.
Well, it's laughable. You know, when you look at an individual, look at his record, look what he stood for all of his life. He doesn't change colors in a day or two, even through this campaign. Everything that he's indicated to me, he's never talking to the African American community. He's really talking to his base. The stereotypical ways that he talks about African Americans, it is really talking to the base that he hopes to turn out. So I understand what he's doing, but the African Americans are not fooled by what he's doing, and that's why he'll probably get 0.2% of their vote.
Dr. Loudon, election day is coming. Voting's already started. What kind of percentage of the African American vote does Donald Trump aspire to at this point?
I think he plans to beat the record of any previous GOP candidate in recent history. I know that he's doing extremely well with minorities in Florida and some of the other key swing states. He's talking about the things that people really care about, people that have been locked out of the system, that are used for their votes every single time an election circles around, and then they're forgotten about right after the election is over. That is the history. And all you have to do to figure this out is to look at any city that has been run by Democrat rule for decades. Every single one of those cities, the plight of minorities is worse than any other cities. And so I think that Mr. Trump's free market approach, talking about jobs, talking about getting kids out of these schools that they are imprisoned in, that are failing, I think these kinds of things resonate, and I think he will set records.
Congressman Meeks, I'm going to read you something that Dr. Loudon wrote recently on her blog, making sort of a similar point, but in somewhat more colorful terms. I want to ask you what you think about this. She wrote about 3 days ago, "The Democrat machine has used plantation politics on minorities for so long, most don't even know they are still on the plantation, being used for their votes with lavish promises and then quickly discarded until they are needed again for their votes." She says that the hypocrisy of the left is as criminal as any slave owner and more dishonest. Please, your thoughts.
I think, number one, it shows complete naivete to know what slavery is really about. And to be a doctor to talk about that, and I think you should really go and observe what slavery was really about. I don't hear anybody talking about, as for decades, Republicans have represented Appalachia, where there's nothing but poor whites represented by Republicans on a consistent basis for decades. So are they on the slave plantation? Do you know what slavery really was and what that institution represents? And to utilize those words in this context, when in fact, what America has done. America has moved forward. Why I know that this is the greatest country on this planet is when you look at the progress that we've made with all ethnicities, and particularly African Americans.
Dr. Loudon, I'd love to get you to respond to what Congressman Meeks just said.
Well, I think the establishment has done an incredible just snow job on many Americans, and I believe they're continually falling for these tactics. They're continually being used for their votes to give power to the establishment. And I'll side with them on one thing. I will say there are dirty, corrupt establishment people on both sides of the aisle. Mr. Trump has been the outsider who has come in and spoken against not only the Democrat establishment, he's right about that, but he's also spoken against the GOP establishment and stood up to them. He stood up to the media establishment that many of us that are completely colorblind in this world have wanted to see some of these old, elitist, institutional forms of discrimination abolished. And I think Mr. Trump has done that. He's also demonstrated in his own company his ability and willingness to use the most qualified person for the best job. I'll tell you, just personally, the person that talked to me originally when I wasn't supporting Mr. Trump, I was just habitually supporting a different candidate because I'd known them for longer, knew more about them, felt safer. And the people that talked me into supporting Mr. Trump, ironically, are all minorities. I myself am a minority. And so I think that this isn't really about skin color. This race is about breaking up the cartels that are destroying our country and disenfranchising all sorts of people across this country and giving power back to the people.
Dr. Ladin, I just got to ask you, you're a minority in what sense?
I'm actually Jewish. Is my heritage. I'm a Christian, but my heritage is Jewish, and that's another group of people that I feel like have been used election after election with scare tactics and other things to get their vote, and then they're completely shoved aside when it comes to actual policy.
I want to ask you both a version of the same question, starting with you, Congressman Meeks. To the extent you understand what's inspired and motivated the supporters of Donald Trump, where do you think Hillary Clinton has common cause, if she does win, with people who supported Donald Trump in this race?
Well, I think Hillary Clinton has already shown the ability to bring people together. She's done that, and I've seen her do it when she was a senator in New York.
Congressman, I'm sorry if I can interrupt you. I'm talking about issues. What are the issues that Trump voters care about that you think Hillary Clinton shares?
Well, I think that when you talk about jobs, transportation, and infrastructure, I think there's a bill that Hillary Clinton would put forward in the first 100 days that no matter where you come from, a lot of the Donald Trump supporters would love to make sure that their infrastructure and their roads are improved and that they get those jobs that bill and that infrastructure bill would put forward.
Okay. Dr. Ladin, quickly, less than 30 seconds. What's something Hillary Clinton talks about that you find appealing?
You know, she talks about a lot of things that I find appealing, but her actions, unfortunately, speak much louder than her words. When he talks about jobs, she's talking about government jobs. That's very different from private sector jobs because the regulator is essentially the boss in those situations. She wants to be that regulator. Mr. Trump wants to hand the power back to the people. Education, put it on the local level where neighborhoods control their education instead of federal bureaucrats who don't ever have to look in the eyes of those children or those people out of work. That's the difference.
Dr. Ladin, thank you very much. Congressman Meeks, thank you very much. It's going to be hard for the winner to unite the whole country, it appears. When we come back, we'll check in with the great Washington Post reporter covering the campaign. But first, these words from our sponsors.
are 13 news cycles away from E-Day, but who's counting? We know at least one person who is, and she joins us now. Jenna Johnson is the Washington Post reporter covering Donald J. Trump, and she is in our Washington, D.C. bureau. Jenna, great to see you. You're counting the days. Why?
Because I'm exhausted. It has been a long, long campaign cycle. I think everyone is counting down the days at this point.
So we had a discussion earlier today. Mark was talking to Donald Trump. We were talking it over. He's in D.C., where you are. There's a couple different interpretations of what happened today. One was that he was there to tout his business prowess and his ability to get things done. Another was that he's there to kind of tend to his corporate and financial needs in anticipation of losing on Election Day. Which of these do you think, on the basis of what you know, is more accurate?
Well, who knows? But my read on it is that Donald Trump, his whole pitch this whole campaign cycle has been that he's Donald Trump, that he's a businessman, that he is someone who has launched successful hotels and built big buildings and things like that. And so I think when we're in these final two crucial weeks, it seems like kind of a weird jump off of the campaign trail to go to a hotel and do a ribbon cutting. But for him, it's just a reminder to voters that he is an outsider, that he's a businessman, that this is the experience that he brings to the table.
You wrote over the weekend about his mood at his Sunday night event. Different mood today. John and I both thought he seemed relatively up in my conversation with him. What's your sense of where his head is at now?
Well, I think that he has kind of come through a bruising few weeks and headed into these last final 2 weeks and has just decided that he's going to give this his all, that he's going to do as many rallies as he can, that he's perhaps going to follow direction from his staff a little bit more. We've been seeing a lot more scripted speeches. He's been talking about policy. He just had a rally a couple minutes ago where he was focusing on kind of his plan for urban communities and things like that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
What do you know about in terms of what places he'll go to and the kinds of events he'll have the rest of the way? Will it mostly be big rallies, or?
It's a mix. It's these big rallies, and then it's smaller gatherings, kind of roundtable discussions with small groups of people. He had kind of gotten away from doing those for a while and was just kind of doing one big rally a day. He's now doing 2 or 3 big rallies a day, plus a few smaller events with smaller groups of people. And he's also sticking to the core states where he really needs to compete. Earlier this month, we saw him going to places like Wisconsin and Colorado, and places where you just wondered, why is he spending time in these places? Even today with a jaunt into Washington, D.C. But I think for the next 2 weeks, as far as I know, they're planning on really focusing on the places where he really needs to be.
Yeah, and it does leave them even a more narrow path than we talked about before, with New Hampshire and Maine seeming to be where they're trying to find the last 5, assuming they can win what we call here the Big 5. The campaign, I don't like to navel gaze and talk about the press much, but Donald Trump's relationship with the media has been a story throughout. There was a period about a week ago where there seemed to be a lot of tension. Today he did an interview with CNN, with ABC, with Bloomberg. He did a Reuters interview. Do you have a sense of whether he personally or the campaign itself realizes they need to be more than the Bill O'Reilly candidate?
Well, they are starting to do more interviews. They haven't returned my request to do an interview with them yet. Thank you. But I think that there is, I mean, he hasn't done a press conference since late July. And this is a guy who used to hit Hillary Clinton day after day after day for not doing press conferences. And so there's someone who is, listening to that criticism and putting him out there in these interviews to talk to people. But I was out on the trail with him all last week, and every time that he got onto stage, he was yelling at the media, saying terrible things at the media. And the hatred that we get from the crowds really has increased. Sunday night, Saturday night, Friday, it was the worst that I had ever seen it.
Let's get Jenna an interview, and let's get everybody a press conference or 10 between now and Election Day. Jenna, thank you very much. Jenna Johnson, The Washington Post. John and I will be right back. Head to BloombergPolitics.com, our website right now, for more on our latest poll of Florida, as well as my interview today in Washington with Donald Trump. Coming up on Bloomberg TV, the chairman and CEO of IBM. That's on Bloomberg Technology. Until tomorrow, John will be back here, same bad time, same bad channel. Thanks for watching. Sayonara.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. With less than 2 weeks until Election Day, a new Associated Press GFK poll has Hillary Clinton leading Donald Trump nationally by a staggering 14 percentage points. The survey has Clinton at 51%, Trump at 37%. The poll attributes part of Clinton's advantage to solid Democratic turnout in early voting. An earthquake with a preliminary magnitude of 5.4 shook central Italy Wednesday. A powerful aftershock knocked out power and closed a major highway. Historic buildings in the town of Viso were damaged. No injuries were reported. 2 months ago, an earthquake destroyed nearby villages, killing some 300 people. For the first time in 25 years, the U.S. has abstained from a UN resolution criticizing America's economic embargo against Cuba. Ambassador Samantha Power says that for more than 50 years, the U.S. had a policy of isolating Cuba.
Abstaining on this resolution does not mean that the United States agrees with all of the policies and practices of the Cuban government. We do not. We are profoundly concerned by the serious human rights violations that the Cuban government continues to commit.
Republican lawmakers support the 55-year-old embargo despite Washington's resumption of full diplomatic relations with Havana. I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. Bloomberg Technology is next.
And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Tesla shares jump after smashing estimates. The electric car maker reports a rare quarterly profit. Plus, IBM CEO Ginny Rometty joins us live. We will dig into Big Blue's bet on Watson and the new partnerships with Slack and GM. And our conversation with Steve Ballmer, the former Microsoft chief, weighs in on Twitter's future ahead of earnings Thursday. He's also a big Twitter investor. But first, to our lead. Tesla shares take off after the company posts a rare profitable quarter, its second in Tesla's history as a public company. Adjusted earnings per share came in at 71 cents versus an estimated 54-cent loss. Adjusted revenue also beat. But beyond the financials, investors are listening closely to the call with CEO Elon Musk, particularly for more color on his controversial plan to merge the company with SolarCity and create a one-stop shop for clean energy products. Shareholders get the chance to vote on that plan in just a couple of weeks. Joining me now for more, our Bloomberg View columnist and auto industry analyst Ed Niedermeyer, and in New York, Axiom Capital Managing Director Gordon Johnson, who covers SolarCity. Ed, I want to start with you because earlier this year, we got our hands on an email from Elon Musk to employees saying, quote, "It would be awesome to throw a pie in the face of all the naysayers on Wall Street who keep insisting that Tesla will always be a money loser." Is this a pie in the face of Wall Street? And is it just one pie, or will there be more pies?
Yeah, I think that's that's a good way of thinking about it. It is clearly a pie in the face of Wall Street. But how many more pies he has left is unclear. I think one of the things that was really important in pushing them over the line to a profit this quarter was these ZEV credits from California. Those are essentially going away. And the color that I heard from Mr. Musk on the call suggests that it's not clear how they're going to repeat this in the fourth quarter, although he is saying that they will repeat it.
They did boost production. They made 25,000 cars, which is almost twice what they did last year. Is that sustainable?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they have to keep ramping up production. The real big...
Can they?
No, I believe they can, up to a given point. I've done some research into the permits for their factory. I think there's a limit in the short term and potentially in the longer term until they file for new environmental permits. But that limit is significantly higher than where they are right now. It's more like 250,000 units. So up until that point, I think they're good. Investors are also excited about free cash flow right now, $176 million. Why is that a big deal? Well, because it hasn't happened before. It's an important thing. Again, though, I mean, I think, you look at the valuation of the company, and if this is, what a profitable quarter looks like for them, how does that, right? How much cash are they really going to ever return to investors? Manufacturing is a low-volume business. This is a huge accomplishment. I think they pulled out a lot of stops to make it happen, and they got over the line. But it's not like they're, generating huge amounts of cash here. And I think that's something that, looking down the road, you have to wonder: will they ever reach a point where they're going to really return a huge, throw off a lot of cash from the business? All right, Gordon, I want to bring you into this. Of course, you cover SolarCity, and SolarCity shares are up following Tesla shares. Does this mean that shareholders are more likely to approve a merger?
Well, I think the shareholders have always been likely to approve a merger. I mean, if you look at the merits of this deal, it just doesn't make sense. The core basically concept of this deal is you're going to marry rooftop solar technology with battery technology, storage technology. But the whole premise and the whole tailwind behind rooftop solar technology is the ability to access net metering, i.e. storing your power in the grid. If you bring in a battery, you essentially eliminate that dynamic. So the merger doesn't make sense from that perspective. And just real quickly on Tesla's results, keep in mind, we talked about the 140 ZEV credits, but they were also guiding the street to a 35% lease rate, and it came in at 32%. The street was changing their models. That was also a big benefit in the quarter, and we know that there was big discounting. So again, as was stated earlier, I don't know if these results are repeatable. And with respect to the deal, the merits of the deal never made sense. And one other thing that's worth note is when you had Evercore come in and do the valuation on this deal, they didn't even have SolarCity or Tesla's financials before they gave the okay and put a 3 to 5% terminal value on this deal. So it's like they were in the dark and they gave the okay. There were 3 other bidders who didn't match Tesla's bid for SolarCity. So it's aggressive. I think Elon Musk takes a very Machiavellian approach to business. You want him toiling around, but you don't necessarily want him doing it with your money.
Ed, you're smiling and nodding.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that he didn't mention was actually that CapEx is reduced. Musk just said on the call that they're going to ramp that back up in the fourth quarter as they start building up the Model 3 launch. I think a lot of investors probably assumed, and fans of the company assumed, that a lot of that ramping has already started happening. And I think the fact that they're coming in under guidance by about $500 million on their CapEx, they're behind on that, and yet Musk says there's no impact to the Model 3, production, which is already a really, really aggressive schedule. So that's something we're going to, have to watch closely.
Gordon, we're expecting Tesla to unveil its solar roof product on Friday. What sort of an impact are you expecting from that on the potential merger?
I don't think it's going to be a big impact. Look, we're tracking California Solar Initiative data as well as investor-owned utility data looking at applications for net metering and applications for rooftop solar. There's no doubt the U.S. market has taken a nosedive this year. Just 6 months ago, ASPs, average selling prices for modules in the U.S. were 65 cents. You're talking about 40 cents right now. There's been a big drop. So the demand in the U.S. market and the U.S. solar rooftop market is suffering right now as the utilities are winning the battle, the net metering battle, and I think that's going to weigh on all the rooftop vendors, including SolarCity. If you're a Tesla shareholder and you're voting for this deal, I got to question, your sanity. I think essentially you're following Elon Musk into the void, and we think that's just what it's going to be. It's going to be a void of cash flow, eating essentially Tesla's cash flow. I don't get it.
Tesla and Elon Musk also ramping up their plans around autonomous driving. I spoke to Sebastian Thrun, who basically invented the Google self-driving car and was very excited about what Elon Musk is doing, saying that a new generation of cars, Tesla cars, are going to be fully autonomous. But there are still questions around the existing Autopilot feature. You recently wrote a column where you talked about the number of deaths related to Autopilot, and there's some contention around that. Clarify what exactly you were trying to say.
Yeah, so I wrote in the column that several people have died, and Tesla came back and asked me to correct that to 2. And I think it's important to clarify that 2 is the number of deaths that Tesla doesn't contest. There have been a number of crashes in which there's been some question where what the owner says and what Tesla says the data says are in conflict. And I think it's important to understand that Tesla does not provide owners with copies of the data, which for event data recorders under legislation in the U.S. you're supposed to, and they say their data collection system just doesn't meet the definitions of that. And the other thing is that they don't provide a commercially available tool. So none of Tesla's claims are been verified by third parties. So I, as someone who writes these columns, I'm totally open to corrections and to third-party verification of what I report. I just wish Tesla played by the same rules.
All right. Ed Niedermeyer, Bloomberg View columnist, auto industry analyst, Gordon Johnson of Axiom Capital Management. Thank you both. Staying on the earnings front, Groupon shares sliding after hours after the deal provider announced it's buying former rival Living Social. Groupon said the amount of the purchase is not material. The transaction should close next month. It was once valued at $6 billion in 2011. Groupon also posted a loss for the third quarter, but met analyst estimates. Coming up, IBM Chairman and CEO Ginny Rometty joins me live from IBM's World of Watson conference in Las Vegas. Her big bet on Watson ahead. Also ahead, former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer, known for sounding off, and he says Twitter is the best way to do it. He'll make the case for Twitter's independence later this hour. This is Bloomberg. report third quarter earnings on Thursday, but the company's bumped up its release time to before the bell, departing from its usual time after U.S. markets close. This on the heels of our Bloomberg scoop that Twitter plans to fire about 8% of its workforce as the struggling social media company prepares to go it alone for the time being. We caught up with Twitter investor Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft and Ballmer Group co-founder, got his take on the company's road ahead. His take very important given he's an investor in Twitter and Microsoft, among very few other things. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Well, I think Twitter is an irreproducible asset. Just think even, what goes on, Donald Trump tweeting out late at night, and everybody wants to talk about it. I don't think there's any vehicle that lets you speak broadly to a mass audience any better than Twitter. Could the product be easier to use? Of course, the product could be easier to use, and I think that's an important area. Could the product benefit from additional innovation that takes it in surrounding areas? Yes. The cost structure, at least there's rumors they're working on it. I have no information that anybody else doesn't have. But I see a lot of potential in Twitter.
So do you see Twitter having a future as an independent company?
I think Twitter would be great as an independent company, and I'm sure there are acquisitions that would also make sense for the company, the product, and shareholders.
Anything you've heard about?
I read what everybody else reads in the paper, if you will, and we'll see what happens.
What about going private?
Going private is a distraction. In my opinion, I think the company would be better served to put its energy into innovation than all of the work it would take to go private.
Interesting. We've heard rumors about you being interested in buying the company. We've heard rumors about various Silicon Valley heavyweights getting together to buy the company. Any truth to any of that?
No, so no truth to my interest in buying the company. None.
And have you ever heard anything about any others wanting to buy the company?
Nobody's reached out to me, that's for sure.
What about Jack Dorsey having his 2 jobs? Do you think that's a good setup?
I think it's easy to question. People would obviously, including me, like more out of Twitter. CEO is clearly divided in the way Jack spends his time. Certainly as a shareholder, it would be reassuring to me if he was entirely focused on Twitter.
And also as a former CEO, I mean, you know how hard a job that is. Is it really possible to be the CEO of 2 public companies and do a good job?
It's not possible for me to comment. I've never tried it.
Has he ever, being a big shareholder, has he ever called you and asked for any advice?
I do speak to the management team once a quarter after earnings. I certainly share, opinions that I have as they come up, and they listen to them, and I wouldn't say they solicit advice. That would be incorrect.
What do you tell them?
Well, I tell them the same things I just talked to you about. Product innovation, real opportunities, simplifying the product, real opportunities, cost structure, do they have it where they want it to be, those kinds of things.
Okay, so last question on Twitter. As one of their biggest investors, what would you like to see happen with Twitter? Would you like to see them stay independent? Would you like to see them sell themselves? What would you like to see?
I'd like to see them work on the things they need to do from a product and cost structure standpoint and be open, always open to opportunities to be independent, but also to make a sale if that seems appropriate.
How excited are you about the live streaming aspect? I mean, the NFL games, presidential debates.
I think it proves the power of Twitter. How it actually works out from a business model perspective, I think, we'll all learn, but I think it shows the power of the brand and the asset.
My conversation there with Steve Ballmer, former CEO of Microsoft. Be sure to tune in next Sunday, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, for my full conversation with Ballmer on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. Of course, he is also now the owner of the LA Clippers. This Sunday, don't miss Vinod Khosla, founder of Khosla Ventures, always full of controversial things to say. You don't want to miss it. Coming up, we head back to Las Vegas to IBM's World of Watson conference and speak with Slack CEO Stuart Butterfield. The secretive Silicon Valley startup Palantir Technologies may be heading towards an IPO. CEO Alex Karp said the software company is well positioned to go public. Palantir is previously valued at $20 billion, and Karp says he expects to reach profitability by next year. Lately, Palantir had seen increased employee defections over compensation backlash and its reluctance to go public. And turning now to another major tech exit on the horizon, Snapchat trying to raise as much as $4 billion in its IPO. This, according to people familiar with the matter, that could value the company at about $25 to $35 billion. Our Bloomberg Technology executive editor, Tom Giles, joins me now for more. So Snapchat is going for it.
They are going for it. After this year of IPO drought, they're really going to kick off 2017 with a bang. $4 billion on the high end is what they're looking to raise. A valuation that would be in the 25 to 35, as you mentioned. This is pretty ambitious, given that the last time they raised, they were in about the $18 billion range. So, I mean, what you're looking at is a company that's really optimistic about its prospects. It's optimistic about its evolution. This is the company that started out as this, fun disappearing text that got used for some sexting and for things that you didn't want your kids involved in. We sort of banned our kid from Snapchat for a while, but it's really evolved. It's becoming much more of a media platform, much more of a destination, much more useful to marketers, for example. They're innovating and creating new types of advertising tools that you can use. You can add filters. Politicians have really glommed onto Snapchat as a way of getting their message out. Clinton's on there, Trump is on there. They've realized that this is important for getting their message, and marketers are seeing the same thing. And Snapchat is moving into these other areas like the glasses, video. They're taking your video clips and compiling them into this kind of rough draft video of events around the world. So again, been a really big evolution for Snapchat.
And it's filled with exclusive content, whether it's a snap from a presidential candidate or a new treatment on a story from any number of media organizations. And you actually have to be on Snapchat to actually see that content and engage with it. And if you don't, it goes away.
Right.
That said, so much of this is so new. What makes Snapchat so, it seems almost like they're in a rush.
Well, I think there's a few things.
Or maybe that's because everyone else is moving so slowly when it comes to the road to IPO.
Right, and think about it. I mean, there's not a lot of, the impetus to stay private for so long is not going away. These companies, Uber has talked about, we're gonna drag this out as long as humanly possible. There's at some point the investors, the venture capitalists who have been putting money into these companies, they're looking for an exit. I am not privy to the conversations between Snapchat's VCs and the company's management and their bankers, but you have to think that of all of my investments, I'm a venture capitalist, Silicon Valley, so many of my investments are staying private for a hell of a lot longer. I want an exit somewhere. I want somebody to get out there. Also, don't forget employees. They want to be able to, the cost of living in San Francisco in the Bay Area is really, really high. They want to buy a house. They want to start their kids in private school, whatever it is. So employees are looking for exits. Management are looking for ways to unlock some of the value that they've been sitting on.
Some of the earliest investors in Snapchat, Lightspeed Ventures, Benchmark Partners, Benchmark, of course, and Bill Gurley, also investors in Uber.
Right.
And it's so ironic that Uber and Airbnb are businesses that are at least valued much more highly, and yet they are still waiting in the wings.
Right, exactly. And I mean, something to bear in mind, too, that by some measures, Snapchat is doing better than Twitter, a company that's been publicly traded for a long time, just in terms of pure numbers and in some measures of engagement. So, it's actually at the point, they're looking at revenue of $350 million. I mean, they're at the point where you start to think about them as a more mature company, as a company that's ready to get out there, and a company that's ready to take in a lot of money. As we said, $4 billion. There's a lot of snapping that can happen using $4 billion. There's a lot of areas you can expand into with $4 billion.
All right, Tom, hang on. I want to ask you a quick question about Apple. Shares slid Wednesday after the company reported fourth quarter results on Tuesday. Apple boosting its sales forecast for the holiday season to between $76 and $78 billion, beating most analyst estimates. Some, though, thought it should have done even better in light of rival Samsung's massive Note 7 recall. Analysts on Bloomberg earlier today explained the stock reaction. Take a listen.
What investors have been asking for of Tim Cook is make Apple grow again. And I think that's what we finally saw in this outlook. It wasn't modeled. It wasn't in our estimates. And the outlook in terms of revenue for the December quarter is excellent.
As investors think about their confidence in the iPhone business, it should have been boosted last night. I think the reason why the stock is down is that simply expectations ran up over the last 2 weeks. For example, B of A was out with a call just before that they would guide to 81 million iPhones for December, and in fact, they guided above the street at 77 or 78, but below some of those whisper numbers. And so I think that our perspective is that look at the big picture. The iPhone franchise is intact. It's going to return to growth and should stay in growth mode for about the next 7 quarters, which is about as long as you can see in a tech company.
Well, one thing is clear, that Apple is no longer a growth company. We have to look at it as a value company. And the way we've looked at it is we've looked at the intrinsic value of Apple. And what it has is it has a very loyal customer base, which is actually growing, not at the pace as we would like, but it's growing install base, and they remain loyal, and they spend more money with Apple on a bunch of different products.
Now, I did speak with Apple CFO Luca Maestri yesterday, and I asked about the Samsung issue, and he said that they simply could not tell just how much this has actually impacted them at this point. I mean, we're talking only a week, 2 weeks of the actual quarter, and what he said is we've already been seeing so many Android switchers to the iOS platform. It's difficult to know at this point, but presumably they'll have more information by the end of next quarter. But what's your take?
Well, there was a little bit of disappointment that they're not making more hay. They're not capitalizing this, or at least they're not expecting it at this point. Apple can always surprise us, right?
They love being conservative.
This could be a great holiday season for them. It is too early to know. This is a projection. They don't know if that revenue is going to be 76, 78 billion. It could be much big. It could be much higher than that. They are being conservative. Now, the thing you have to remember is Samsung is going to come back with a vengeance as soon as they can get that 8 out. And you've also got to remember in China, where there was a lot of declines for Apple in the last quarter, in China they've got to deal with a lot of low-cost competitors. We've been talking about this a lot, right. And that's an area of great concern. So that's another wild card that you got to take into consideration for the Christmas quarter.
Revenue in China down 30% year over year for Apple. Okay, Tom Giles, our executive editor for Tech, thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, IBM Chairman and CEO Ginny Rometty joins us live from IBM's World of Watson conference in Las Vegas. Her big bet on Watson just ahead. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. 2016 has been the deadliest year for refugees crossing the Mediterranean headed for Europe. According to the UN's refugee agency, at least 3,800 people have drowned. Many of the refugees were attempting to travel from Libya on the North African coast to Italy. In Calais, France, migrants set fires to a refugee camp before police moved in to relocate them. Authorities then dismantled the shanty town known as the Jungle. The people are being moved to centers around France where they can seek asylum. An Egyptian court has upheld life sentences against the leaders of the country's now outlawed Muslim Brotherhood and 36 others. The appeals court rejected appeals from the group's leader, Mohammed Badi. Death sentences were also upheld against 10 others. The case dates back to July of 2013 in the aftermath of the military-led removal of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi. A new report finds that if current trends continue, the global gender pay gap won't be closed for another 170 years. The annual study by the World Economic Forum also finds the pay gap has reverted to where it was in 2008 after peaking in 2013. The U.S. ranks 45th on that list. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 6:30 p.m. Wednesday here in New York, 9:30 Thursday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Let's start, as always, over in New Zealand, where the NZX has been trading for 90 minutes now and already looking pretty good, up 1/3%. Nikkei futures are looking mixed, and we are expecting very modest gains here on the ASX at the open. And at the open, we will be closely watching shares in National Australia Bank. Just announced full-year cash profit up 4% to $6.48 billion. That beat estimates. Still coming under pressure from bad debts, though. Bad debts up 7% and net interest margins contracting by 2 basis points. A 99-cent dividend coming out of National Australia Bank. Sticking with bank earnings, the market's going to have its first chance to react to Bank of China, which came out with third quarter earnings after the close on Wednesday. 2.5% rise there to $6.2 billion for the 3 months to the end of September. Later today, more earnings from China Construction Bank, Agriculture Bank of China, and the big one, Samsung, third quarter. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. IBM is teaming up with Slack, GM, and Teva Pharmaceuticals as the company expands its reach of its Watson artificial intelligence technology. IBM has placed a huge bet on Watson being a big part of the company's future. The announcement's all coming out of the IBM World of Watson conference in Las Vegas, where IBM CEO Ginny Rometty joins us now with more. Ginny, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you.
Yep, thank you, Emily. Nice to be here.
So you're announcing several new partnerships today, Slack, GM, Teva Pharmaceuticals. Just how many more people will Watson touch as a result of these partnerships?
Yeah, we just had a great conference here. In fact, over 20,000 people, World of Watson. And as I just told the crowd, I said, right now, Watson already touches hundreds of millions of consumers. And by the end of next year, we're on a path to be 1 billion. It will be 1 billion. And that is through, you just mentioned, Emily, some of the customers that we're partnering with. So you mentioned General Motors now coming out in the 2017 vehicles. OnStar Go, which is a partnership with Watson about really using your time in your vehicle in a very personalized but safe way. Or Teva, which is all about changing. Teva, by the way, for those who don't know, it's the world's largest generic manufacturer. And what we're doing all around making the whole process and kind of delivery of drugs in a different way with Watson. And you talked about Slack. And we had just announced, by the way, last week, the work now out and available with Quest Diagnostics, which really does make precision medicine available to almost everyone in the United States.
Let's start with the GM partnership, bringing Watson to the road. Give us an example of how Watson will be powering a new driver experience.
So this idea, and again, keep it simple, but it's interacting. GM has got in about 1.5 billion pieces of information from connection, and you individually permissioning what happens here. So the car gets to know you, and everything from you have a prescription to pick up for your children on the way home, telling you where to get off early, when to go get it, to pre-ordering, paying for your coffee, to another example would just be, look, you're going to run out of gas, getting you to the right place, paying ahead at the pump for you to get your gas. And it just goes on and on from there. So this is just the beginning of it. And in fact, there are a number of partners as part of this first round coming. ExxonMobil, you've got MasterCard, Parkopedia, a whole group of partners. You could see more being added on, but in a very permissioned way. So it just changes that experience, because people on average in their lifetime spend 38,000, 37,000 hours in their car.
Tech companies from Apple to Google to Uber are vying for control of the car. What makes you think that Watson and IBM, GM plus IBM, have something special that other technology companies can't replicate?
Well, in this case, using Watson and the artificial intelligence can't replicate it, and therefore GM has got data that can't be replicated either. And by the way, others have different kinds of data of their own that can get used. So I can see us being able to play a role across many different parts in auto, and we do today, by the way. So whether it's Daimler Car2Go or it's work we've done with Honda on batteries, there's many different places that this type of cognitive intelligence will come into play. And it isn't just autonomous driving. We do participate, by the way, on autonomous driving with subsystems in the car. So this is a whole continuum of opportunity that's out there, and there'll be all different forms, whether it's ride sharing, autonomous driving, your owned car, and there'll be a very wide variety of ways you'll participate.
Now, you say that Watson is differentiated because every client basically gets their own individual version of it, and that, as I understand it, IBM won't own or use that data. Why is that important? And what advantage does that give you over other companies like Google, like Microsoft, like Amazon that are pushing hard on AI?
Yes. Yes, now look, as you know, we've been building Watson for quite a period of time, and in fact, a decade before we even did Jeopardy, and now in this 5 years, how far we have come. And we really made some strategic decisions that make Watson the AI platform for business and knowing what matters to business. And in every business, you've accumulated a lot of information. It's yours. So its value is yours, the IP is yours, but so should be the competitive advantage. So we've made a choice of an architecture where we'll bring data, we'll bring Watson and algorithms, and you bring your data, but the insights go to you as the client, and we're able to separate those so they don't train the base platform. And you make choices on that. And to a client, that's extremely important, because there isn't a client in any industry that isn't going to have as the basis of their competitive advantage be this information. Everyone we know. And so this is perhaps, in my mind, not just mine, clients' eyes, one of the most important decisions we made.
Now, Ginny, you've been hard at work transforming IBM, and Watson is a huge part of that. How would you evaluate your progress so far, given that, as we all know, transformations in tech are not easy?
Yes. Well, and you know, we're 105. We are the only one that has made it through multiple transformations and multiple eras of technology. And I'm proud, the work of 400,000 IBMers. And just last week when we did earnings, you saw the strategic imperatives. They're now $32 billion in size, 15% growth, 40% of IBM. And you'll find Watson is a silver thread, not only through those, but you'll see it in many parts of our base business. If you look at our big technology services business, the largest in the world, much of what they're doing is porting clients to the cloud, and Watson's a piece of that.
So IBM at the same time has several legacy businesses in addition to these new businesses that you're pushing into, and investors still seem to be focused on these legacy businesses. How should we think about, the performance of these legacy businesses versus your newer businesses over the short term and the long term?
Yeah, Emily, and you know, one thing is I don't think of them as legacy businesses. We've divested of a set of businesses that we thought were commoditizing and better with others. But the businesses that we have, these are really important core franchises that we run. And if you look at our global technology services business, our systems business, these are really important parts, have been modernized many times. They may not be in growing markets, but modernized for whether it's blockchain, mobility, security, and to have Watson be part of them. So they're really an important piece. If you look at what we do for running the banks of the world, the airlines of the world, the manufacturers of the world, so they work together. And the announcement with GM is a good example of that. We'd been doing work out of our Global Business Consulting Services unit for a long time on OnStar. And so that served as a platform and knowledge as we then moved into what we did here with OnStar Go with Watson. And so they are related together, and they're just two different markets, different growth rates. So what we call the strategic imperatives, businesses that we're either building, they're new, and now clearly at scale at $32 billion and 40% of the company. And the other businesses, our core franchises, while may not be growing, are very important businesses. They're profitable businesses. They're solid businesses together.
Now, you've ramped up acquisitions, and a lot of these acquisitions in part to build up data and boost the power of Watson. Is that something and a strategy that we should expect to see continue?
Yes, and you're right. We've done a good number of acquisitions, and in fact, over the last 2 years, 25 acquisitions. And how we look at them is example for Watson Health. That is an industry that would benefit tremendously from data that you had the ability to reuse, anonymize, and reuse. And so you saw us acquire companies like Truven and Phitel, Explorus, and Merge, ways to train Watson. So that is all for Watson Health. On the other hand, you would have just seen what we acquired, a company called Promontory, which is the world's most expert group in compliance and risk and financial services. They'll be training Watson as we launched Watson Financial Services. So where there's information, where there's expertise, because you're really changing industries and you're changing processes, you need those skills, you need that information, as well as just the technology itself. And that's a really important differentiator for what we do.
All right, IBM CEO and Chairman Ginny Rometty, live from the World of Watson conference in Las Vegas. Ginny, thank you so much for joining us. We're also going to be catching up with Slack CEO Stuart Butterfield coming up next after announcing this big partnership with IBM. This is Bloomberg. to the IBM World of Watson conference in Las Vegas, where Slack and IBM are teaming up to bring Watson to Slack's global community of developers and enterprise users. With the computing capabilities of Watson, developers will be able to create more bots and conversational interfaces. Joining us now, Slack CEO Stuart Butterfield. Stuart, every time we talk about bots, I feel like we're adding new words to the dictionary. Some people don't necessarily even understand what this means in practice. But tell us how this partnership with IBM actually changes the user experience for Slack users.
I would love to. So there's a couple of simple ways. One of the ways that we're going to be integrating Watson technologies into Slack in a very direct way is to increase the capabilities of Slackbot, which is a friendly bot that helps onboard new users into Slack and answer questions. That's just kind of scratching the surface. Right now, there's thousands of developers who are creating applications for Slack for customers to use to interact with systems for business workflows, processes that they use. You know, things on the one hand like submitting an expense report or setting up a meeting time. And a lot of those right now are very dumb. They're useful, but they're dumb. And to the extent that we can help developers leverage Watson technology to make those applications smart, to make a meeting scheduler that understands the precedence of people, understands what kind of meetings can be shuffled around, and do a much better job. So kind of approaching human-level intelligence in these very simple applications.
So if you're using IBM AI, then what is Slack building in-house, and how do you decide what to build in-house versus what to bring in from outside?
Well, the surface area for these, I don't know what we'd want to categorize them as, like intelligent technologies, is really, really broad. We have a group in New York called Search, Learning, and Intelligence, and there's still a lot of value, obviously, in simple keyword searching, and so we're working on that and improving the technology there. And we're working on things that are pretty particular to people's use of Slack, so things like recommendations on channels that people should join or channels that people should leave. Where I think there's some intersection and where we can really collaborate with the IBM team is on things like summarization of information you missed while you were out, helping you catch up from a day of travel, or if you imagine a really capable and intelligent chief of staff who is able to read all of your messages for you and kind of distill it down to the few things that really matter today, maybe make some proactive recommendations for things that you should take care of. I'm lucky enough to have someone like that, but even she's not capable of reading every single message, and a Watson-powered bot is theoretically capable of that, and we're making some nice progress now, and we have big expectations for the future.
Now, Slack seems to be a target these days. You've got everyone from Microsoft and Facebook trying to do what you do. Let's start with Microsoft. They're reportedly trying to take you on. They've got some of the tools in place already, like Yammer, like Office, like Skype. Do you have any concerns about that?
We welcome the opportunity to compete. I mean, one of the challenges we have, frankly, is that this is a brand new category and not everyone knows about it. So I think Microsoft kind of giving its seal of approval on this as a category is actually going to help us quite a bit. If you ask our customers, what did you use before Slack? 80% of them say nothing, even though obviously they did use tools for internal communication. And you can imagine what kind of challenge that is when we come into brand new companies where people have no idea what they would even use this for. I believe in our ability to produce a product that people truly love, and people list Slack as a perk in job descriptions. We have this kind of organic growth, which is usually unseen. So here at IBM, we started off with 5,000 people using IBM at the beginning of this year and ended up with 30,000. And that wasn't because we pushed. That's because people love the product and they find genuine utility in it, and therefore spreads. So I think they're going to have to compete on that basis of building products that people truly love.
And do you have similar feelings about Facebook's new product, Workplace? This is something that they've said they've been testing in-house for 2 years. They're touting AI. And look, Facebook does a lot of other things like Microsoft does as well, but they're still Facebook.
Well, I don't know if you've ever seen this photo of 1977 era Microsoft when they're all hippies and they look all crazy, and no one thought that they could take an IBM in the operating system business, but they were very successful there, and IBM is still a very successful company. And then Microsoft went up against Google on Bing, and they put a lot of money and a lot of effort into competing on search. Microsoft's still a very successful company, but wasn't able to catch Google on search. And then you have Google pouring everything they got into trying to take down Facebook on the social side. Again, Google toggles as either first or second most valuable company in the world, but they weren't able to catch Facebook on social. And now you you have Facebook going up against Snapchat. So the moral of that story, as far as we're concerned, is if you're a large incumbent, and you have many lines of business, and you're going up against a small, capable startup that has a lot of traction, it's very difficult for you to compete.
Moral of the story also, I hope you're taking lots of pictures for posterity. Last question, Stuart. Slack is clearly gaining traction, but oftentimes that traction is among individual teams within larger companies, and different teams at different companies use different things. How do you overcome that challenge? Because if not everybody at the company is using it, then certainly you're not seeing the full power of the advantage of using your product.
Yeah, so I think as we move to the enterprise product, which will be coming out next year, but which we have a couple of larger customers, including IBM, beginning to test, we're starting to see the benefits that come from the whole company using it. But it has always been a product for teams, and that is still the core of it. And a team can be 5 people, it can be 15 people, it can be 50 people. You know, when you get to 50,000 people, it's only a loose metaphorical sense in which they're a team. So what we want is something actually a little bit different, which is the ability to have multiple overlapping teams. People can have memberships in multiple, there can be shared channels, and you can create any kind of organizational structure you want. But there's still a huge amount of value, even inside a large organization, for a team of people, which can be like, you know, a business unit, it can be a functional area, it can be an office location.
Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that as President of the United States, Mr. Trump will continue his lifelong defense of the right of free speech in America. As a matter of fact, he supports the First Amendment just as much as he supports the Second Amendment. However, some people have taken advantage of Mr. Trump's hospitality by choosing to disrupt his rallies by using them as an opportunity to promote their own political messages. While they certainly have a right of free speech, this is a private event paid for by Mr. Trump. We have provided a safe protest area outside the venue for all protesters. If a protester starts demonstrating in the area around you, please do not touch or harm the protester. This is a peaceful rally. In order to notify law enforcement officers of the location of the protester, please hold a rally sign over your head and start chanting, "Trump, Trump, Trump." Ask the people around you to do likewise until officers remove the protester. Thank you for helping us make America great again.